Hello, and welcome to Reading Little Blue Books Aloud. That's what I do. I have a collection of what is called Little Blue Books. They were produced in the early part of the last century. And today we are reading book number 1411, entitled The Real Thomas A. Edison by A.L. Shands. And we'll get started. See if we have a copyright date in this one. Yes, copyright 1929. The table of contents, The Real Thomas A. Edison, A.L. Shands, The Amazing Ignatius Donnelly, Miriam Allen DeFord, Deus Americanus, Benjamin de Carassus, was Thoreau an anarchist? C. Hartley Grattan. And that was the contents page. Here we go. The Real Thomas A. Edison, A.L. Shands. The advertisement read, young men, college graduates, over 23, interested in manufacturing, salary $40 to begin. Will be trained for executive positions. If interested, you were to write to a box number, care of the New York Times. I was interested in the salary. Thus it happened that I met Thomas A. Edison, and can shine to my grandchildren by his reflected glory. Of course, I did not know that this advertisement had anything to do with the famous questionnaire for college men that attended the Ask Me Another craze by a decade. But when the employment manager, after I had asked at Lakeside Avenue, West Orange, New Jersey, as a result of his letter, told me that this was the hurdle I had to clear, my appetite was whetted. I have always been a hound for quizzes, psychological or otherwise. It is one of the few ways I have discovered by triumphing over my fellow men and nourishing my self-esteem. They were mowing them down in squads of about 8 in those days. We were taken to the third floor of the laboratory, seated at a long, unfinished wooden table, and presented with the questions, mimeographed, and with intervening spaces for our answers. We had till noon. That gave us a bit less than 2.5 hours for the 150 questions. The knowledge that the examination required of one was hardly encyclopedic. It was a questionnaire that the average high school graduate should have been able to pass. Anyone not temperamentally adverse to acquiring information should know the answers to most of the questions by the time he is 18. However, you might be well informed and fail, because the specific data contained in your physics, chemistry, and history textbooks had grown a bit vague in your mind. I was then only a year out of college, and I swung into it like Babe Ruth into a pitch grooved for the platitudes of the customers. One moment, I always forget to turn this device off. I was the only one on that day's group to complete the examination within the allotted time. The rest of the squad failed in that, and also in the portion that they did answer, because, as I found out later, men were hired who made a satisfactory showing on just 100 questions. It is queer what some college men do not know. We discussed our answers while we waited to be introduced to the old man after the examination was over. One could not name the author of the Pickwick Papers, for instance. Several could not name any 4 composers. If you were a salesman, one question asked, and you met a prospective customer out with a chorus girl, would you tell his wife? And another, you are down to your last $10 and without prospects of getting more. You are playing poker with a stranger. He stays pat on the first hand. After the draw, you have 3 8s. There is 50 cents in the pot, and the stranger bets a quarter. What would you do?" I said I'd call. But I know one man who was hired, and who had said simply, "I don't play poker." There were only a few of such questions of judgment. A few more were in the nature of mathematical puzzles, like the old one about the way to measure a definite volume of water when given two containers of unequal value, each differing from the required volume. The rest asked for factional information as who discovered that or who wrote this. For our trouble, we were allowed to meet the old man. He was at his desk in the center of his library, which is also his office, on the ground floor of the laboratory. One might say right here that the newspaper fiction that either the library or the laboratory is cluttered up in a way supposed to be characteristic of absent-minded inventors is all wrong. It is not a new or a modern building, but it is kept neatly and orderly. Mr. Flanagan, the janitor, must deeply resent the repertorial aspersion. William H. Meadowcroft, Edison's secretary and spokesman for him at dinners, etc., introduced us as we came up to him, singingly. The old man looked at your name on the examination paper. These had been handed to him to correspond with the order in which we were introduced, grinned at you, then allowed you to shake his large, flabby hand. He looked large to me, his face was very pale, and from the tangled, thinning white hair of his head, a fine powder of dandruff had dropped to the broad shoulders of his black coat. The blue eyes that blinked vaguely, kindly, and the large, reddening nose did not help matters. Long-sleeved, soiled-looking underwear curled out beyond the edges of his coat sleeves. He presented a sad picture to me of senile decay, of a dead god still propped on his pedestal, vacantly staring, mouth agape. It was quite important that he see the man. If you did not look all right to him, you were not hired, despite the examination. Well, I got the job. I was to be responsible to Mr. Edison. I sat on the bench outside the library on my first day, waiting for him. I had come early, naturally, about 9:30. The old man trundled in through the doorway, punched the time clock, trundled on past me into the library, like a punchy character out of Dickens, in comical round absorption. He wore a flattened black felt hat, brim turned down over his eyes. He was rather warmly bundled up, for it was November, for driving in an open car, the famous Ford Touring, though one of an older vintage than the present one. The kindly, gentle, soft-spoken, whose soft speech even Edison, in his deafness, can somehow hear. Meadowcroft assured me that TAE had seen me. I didn't believe him. It is the belief around the plant that he sees and knows uncannily, and he does, often enough to justify the belief. I was not to see him that day. About an hour later I was shunted over to the subordinate who took charge of the distribution of inspectors' reports. I was to be an inspector. With a few exceptions, every questionnaire man has had this for his first job. An inspector is a freelance directly responsible to Mr. Edison and no one else, who tours daily an assigned plant or portion of a plant and acts as the eyes of Mr. Edison. It is his duty to use his head to discover improvements in process or procedure from the point of view of maintaining quality or decreasing the cost of production. At best, he is a specimen of efficiency man. At worst, he may become a spotter. He is called that by others, whether he becomes it or not, who reports cases of loafing, personal inefficiency, and so on. He makes daily reports to the old man. These reports are transmitted to the executives concerned for their comment, and then the war is on. The usual life of an inspector used to be about 30 days. By that time he was sick of making enemies or realized a shortage of ideas. He quit. If the old man had been informed that you claimed some knowledge of, say, chemistry, he would be sure to steer you clear of the chemical plant and probably place you in the machine shop or the cabinet plant. He wanted you to be fresh to the subject at hand. The major principle behind the whole inspection system was that a new man will see things to which an old man has become obvious or accustomed. Meanwhile, he may learn enough about the process to replace those who must, for one reason or another, go. The scheme is as good as most for introducing new blood into an industrial organization. The debate issue is the method of choosing these men. I feel that high-powered personal managers loaded down with all the latest mind and face-reading psychologies make as many mistakes as the questionnaire. And, Lord knows, the latter made enough mistakes. It did, however, pick men who were fairly alert, interested in a variety of matters, possessing some retentive powers. The personal manager does not always do that much. He has too many roles. From the clash between inspection and management, Mr. Edison felt he would derive the most benefit. The fact that other men are out looking for faults will keep the management on its toes, he said, and if the inspector made one saving suggestion out of 100, he would pay for himself. Besides all this, the old man loves a fight. He expected a cocky assertiveness about his young men, and he got it. I was not given any rules to go by. I was told to report what I saw and to make suggestions. I was allowed to read some old reports for several days and then sent out to do my dirtiest. The following July, I was recalled from the Wisconsin cabinet plant for 2 weeks because it seemed TAE had suddenly realized that he had hired a member of the chosen people. Another man, who was now sick, had been hired about the same time as myself, and Edison had, until now, not been sure which was which. "Do you like business?" he wanted to know. Well, what exactly did he mean? Buy and sell. Queerly enough, my answer was in the negative. Most Jews were different, he insisted. They wanted to get out for themselves. But he advised me I shouldn't think about making big money for some time. There's no use making money before you're 40. You're bound to lose it all anyway and start all over again. I went broke at 42. But he could understand me. The shape of my hand explained me. It is large and brachiophilic. Constructive head, that shows mechanical earnings. It is the shape of his own and of a sufficient number of his executives to show that he relied on the test. It is a pear-shaped skull is the best type. What he insisted on was the appearance of a physically large cranial capacity. Rumor quotes him as saying that the man who wears a hat under size 7 is not much good, and he was rather disappointed when he first met Henry Ford, one of his chief administrators now. I know that the hat worn by one successful questionnaire man was definitely below 7. Still, he passed the pear-shaped test because of his receding chin. Narrow skulls, he illustrated with his broad, stubby hands, make bookkeepers literary people. I protested. I told him that I myself had always had literary inclinations. He laughed. All wrong, Shands. Stick to mechanics. Constructive work. You'll be a failure in writing. Incidentally, I may add here that at least with respect to me, most editors seem to agree with him. I proceeded to question the whole business of phrenological classification. His answer squelched me. I've been hiring men for 50 years, I know. But for the time being, he was interested in talking about Jews. There were Jews and Jews, he said. He named some of the considered crooks. They make quite an imposing list. Otto Kahn, though, was a good man. The trouble was, about most of them, that they were so damn stuck up they wouldn't intermarry. What do you mean by a Jew? A member of a religious sect? No, race. Religion is all bunk. Race is important. I myself am Scottish and Dutch. Mostly Dutch. From the Zunderzee. Race is important. You can't trust a Sicilian, for instance. They'll stick a knife in your back. I quoted Burke on the hazard of indicting a whole nation or a people. He was adamant. Do you agree with your friend Ford about the Jews? Yes, Henry's right. You believe in an actual conspiracy. I'm a Jew, but I never heard about it. I was never asked to join the conspiracy. No, I don't mean that. But there are lots of bad Jews. Soon as they knew I was going to use a special wax for my cylinder records, they jacked up the price on me. But I fooled them. I changed over to celluloid. Mostly the conversation consisted of his monologue because it requires powerful lung capacity to talk, and Mr. Edison's one serviceable ear, also partially deaf. Later I was able better to appreciate the significance of his classification of bookkeepers and literary men as one group. It was certain at best that he despised the former, thought them quite useless, although he had to put up with them. I had been delegated to make a report on certain costs. I gathered figures which included an overhead percentage. The accounting department urged me to leave that item out, but I couldn't see why. I felt that it was a legitimate part of the cost and that it should be included to give the complete picture. When I presented the report to the old man, he saw the overhead item immediately. Hell, that's no cost, he cried. Only something that a lot of narrow-brained bookkeepers imagine. I had to change the figures. All cost reports to him are thus doctored. It was summer then, and he is a good deal more active in cold than in warm weather. But instead of working in the coolness of his library office, he was now on the top floor of the administration building, a modern concrete structure. Charles, his eldest son by his second wife, I believe that's going to be. By his second wife, now president of the affiliated industries, ordered the roof sprayed periodically. This the old man never knew. Orders were given that he should not be told. It would have been an impeachment of his arrogant assumption of vitality equal to any man's. That vitality to this day is remarkable. Nevertheless, his hours are no longer what legend credits them with being, but he is at the plant between approximately 9:30 and 5:30 every day, half day on Saturday, an hour out for lunch, and he goes home with a briefcase full of reports. These reports have grown more and more condensed, and he does not always read them, and there is always the possibility of a nap on the cot in the library. Sometimes, especially during the summer months, 3 to 4 hours long. I have heard one interesting theory advanced for his present interest in rubber. It is this, that without depriving him of any keen interest in experiment, the rubber research is of such a nature that it will allow him to spend practically his entire time in Florida, where the climate is more suitable for his health. The present one is his longest stay in Florida, where experimental planning has begun and where a force of assistants has been brought. It is, of course, his mental activity that is most important. That knows no slackening. He is as agile as ever in grasping your meaning, even when you have blurted your story out suddenly in the midst of his preoccupation with matters entirely removed from your subject. He keeps in touch with all experimental work. And I think we'll close there for part 1. And we'll be back with part 2.